Be sure to watch my TED Talk on londonreal.tv. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do this. This is Silicon Reel, the video podcast dedicated to the people of the London technology startup scene. I am Brian Rose. I also host London Reel, which is a similar but longer trialogue format that has guests like writers, politicians, drug smugglers, cage fighters.
Drug users?
Drug users, probably. I don't even know about it.
This, right?
Yeah, they don't use on the show.
Okay.
So, not that I know of. My co-host today is Mr. Colin Pyle, who I met on London Reel. He comes to London via Toronto, China, and India. He's got all sorts of crazy stories about motorcycle rides and world records. He's also an entrepreneur here in London. You're here to stay, is that right?
Here to stay. Just got back from Toronto and here to stay.
Nice to have you back, by the way.
Yeah.
Awesome, and this was really Colin's idea to do Silicon Reel. This is episode 5. We're really pumped to do it. The silent partner who's not here is Bryce Keane of the Three Beards. If you don't know these guys, they run the Silicon Drinkabouts, which I'm sure you've been to.
Sure.
It's every Friday night in the Roundabout area. It's drinks. It's pretty much no reservations. You hang out. You have a good time. I've already met tons of people. I've been in touch with email, and it's just great what they're doing. So happy to be doing this. And our guest today is Raj Ramanandi.
Well done.
You like that? Who is the CEO at Number One Seed, which is Silicon Roundabout's only dedicated seed investors in early stage technology.
Maybe not the only, but yeah.
Okay. At one point you were.
One of the few. Well, maybe in Bryce's words, but yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good. You guys, from what I understand, aim to do 5 to 10 deals per year where you invest between 50 and 150
That's right.
thousand pounds of basically your own money, you and your partner, which is very cool, actually. So, you're borderline kind of VC seed in companies that have a product but are pre-revenue. Is that about
in most
right?
cases, yeah, it sounds right.
And for people who aren't familiar with tech talk, that means you got no money coming in. So
no cash flow.
Yeah, no cash flow. Raj, you previously had, I think, 4 or 5 companies, including oddschecker.com, Aqua Online, Digital Profits. I think 3 of them you had successful exits via IPO or acquisitions. Like I said before, you actually invest your own money. So thank you so much for being here. Welcome to Silicon Reel.
Pleasure. This is awesome. Thanks for having me.
It's very cool to have you, man. I think you're the first guy of this type that actually comes in and actually spends your own money, and you choose who has the best ideas. And when I was researching your company, a lot of articles were saying finally London and Europe has someone who is doing this seed, funding finally after the years. And I was wondering why London has lagged the world when it comes to this. And do you think those days are over? Do you think we're here now, we're ready to compete with the other centers in the world?
Why is London lagging? I'll come to that later, but I think it's rapidly getting better. It's really getting quite interesting in terms of the amount of seed stage capital that's coming into London. Bumping into, people have complained about there being plenty of dumb money in the past, people that haven't run startups and haven't been involved with technology companies. Like a dentist or a lawyer that makes a lot of money somewhere else in the country, and it's like, okay, what am I going to do with my money? But let's say they're kind of really interested in early stage technology, will put some cash in, but they're looking at the wrong metrics when it comes to assessing how a company's doing. So they kind of just don't quite get it. There's nothing wrong with their kind of motivations, but the problem is how they then try and nurture that company has been a problem. And I think London's definitely not got a shortage of capital. But what's really interesting now is there's guys who have done it before and are kind of coming back and kind of trying to get that loop going of having been there, done it, and putting their own money back into the ecosystem. And that's where Silicon Valley has been incredible because of the huge exits, acquisitions. There's plenty of money to kind of keep that ecosystem flowing, and they've ridden that for a very long time.
Right, they use their Facebook shares to then invest in the next company and then invest in the next company.
So the Valley has been the leader, and then it's kind of Israel's been a great ecosystem. New York's really flying, but London certainly it's getting there. It's probably I don't know New York very well, but let's say it's 2 years behind New York and kind of 5 or 10 years behind the Valley. But it's a really interesting space right now. 2 years ago when I started investing, there were very few guys putting their own money down, and there was probably one dedicated seed stage fund, which was Passion Capital. And now I would say there are 3 or 4, couple more interesting ones coming up behind. We recently moved into a new office in Clerkenwell called Warner Yard, which is a 4-story building. And Techstars, the accelerator program that started in Boulder, kind of in 5 or 6 cities in the US, have just moved to London, which is kind of almost rubber stamping London as a scene where something interesting happening if Techstars want to come here. And so they're in the building, and on the top floor is just what they call the capital floor. I like to call the penthouse. Is just 3 early stage funds and about 4 or 5 angel investors that are working out of that floor. And that's really interesting because all these early stage deals are typically syndicated deals. So let's, for argument's sake, a typical London seed stage deal is £300,000, and very quickly you can fill that round just on that floor. So that's a sign
money
of
trickles
things.
down.
So that's an interesting analogy for the building. Where there's kind of money on the top.
How come the money guys are never in the basement?
Because they pay the rent.
So just to get, we always like to get kind of the business models out of the way, but I kind of described it in the beginning, but when you meet someone on the street who has no idea about tech in London, how would you describe number one seed?
So number one seed is, it's the same model as a venture capital firm, but they are managing £100 million for a venture capital firm wouldn't be a big fund. They're managing 100 to 500 million. Typically, that would be the average ballpark for VCs in the Valley, New York, London, Germany, Israel. They're managing big sums of capital, and so this is where seed stage investing kind of not happen, is because those guys, the cost of them deploying any capital is vast. They have these big sums of capital, partners are earning big sums of cash. Their models don't allow them to. Their legal fees will be 50, 100K per deal. So why would they deploy a 100K seed stage deal when it costs them the same to do the deal? And so the change has been the angels have kind of fitted the gap, that kind of funding gap, by working lean essentially. So their cost of deploying capital is, let's say, legal agreement is 2, 3, 4, 5K in London. It's a lot more in the States. Your lawyers charge a lot more there, but and that's kind of allowed people to easily access that space. And then because of that huge funding gap, you've started to see other entrepreneurial capital guys have seen an opportunity to kind of come in and be professional investors in the gap between angels and VCs. So the model is deploying capital, but it's finding a model that's efficient enough for them to say, all right, these are interesting companies, let's deploy capital and for it to be cheap enough for them to do that. And the other thing that's allowed this, which we're all aware of, is that the declining cost of setting up a company is so much cheaper. 10 years ago to even get your hosting sorted out. I remember, my first company, one of the things I was tasked with was, bringing clients on and getting their hosting relations put in place. And that was like a big chunky handbook of, okay, who do we have to speak to, what needs to happen, and then there's a nice big fat cost attached to getting that hosting in place. Now it's, any guy can do it. You don't have to be techie to get your hosting sorted out, and it's dirt cheap. And so kind of makes sense, being leaner, deploying less capital, not having huge offices in Green Park or Mayfair. Everyone's in Clerkenwell or Shoreditch, and I think, does that explain the model?
No, it always does.
From your model, so you've been around for 2 years.
Yeah.
So you're investing in 5, roughly?
5 to 10 deals a year. Right. In the last 15, 16 months, we've done 10 deals.
Right. So at some point, are you going to need to pull in another angel, or are you going to start having to exit or sell some shares in companies?
Hopefully, I never have to get another angel because things are going really well.
For people that don't know, what's an angel and why did we come up with that name?
Oh, good question. I don't know where
I don't know where it came from.
I was trying to think about where it came from. But if you had to describe it to someone on the street, what would you say?
And so an angel is basically a guy or girl that is investing their own capital in. Again, it could be an angel not only in tech. There's I don't know if you've seen the series Dragon's Den here in the UK.
Yeah.
So the guys that sit at the
Shark Tank in the US.
That kind of stuff. Yeah, Shark Tank in the US. So it's someone spending their own capital.
And it's the first round of funding typically.
And it's interesting question. It's so we break it down into so there's a friends and family round, which is kind of a really small amount to get you going, and then it's your first move towards a professional round of investment, let's say.
Okay, I understand. Yeah. So Sarah, you were saying you might have to get another angel involved.
Yeah.
Because turnaround on these companies sometimes can be 5
you've got to
years,
be
7 years.
so you're looking at. Yeah. I think the averages for VCs have been. Right. I think it's like 7-8 years.
Yeah.
And kind of moving in and out.
So five deals a year at 50 to 150.
Yeah.
I don't know your personal background and net worth, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I definitely. So I basically put a window of I would be able to do this for 2 or 3 years at the levels that I'd set out to do. So and some of my companies are doing pretty well. So maybe I'll never have to bring in someone else, but.
And it's a good problem to have, I guess. If your companies are doing well and your money's deployed, then you'll figure it out.
Is there any way to monetize shareholder value when you have such a small company, say after 3 years, when you're looking to exit after 7 or 8, or is it just really hard to do that?
So there's something called second market. I don't know if you've looked at that. Secondary market, where you can sell shares in private companies. Right. I don't know anyone that's ever used it, but
I know the Facebook guys were using it pre-IPO. Some of those things, but they're probably very big companies.
Yeah, so for bigger companies, but
you might. I guess if you're doing a second raise for a few million, you might be able to sell some of your shares to those people. Just to liquidate, I guess, some cash.
Yeah, we have of the 10 deals we've done, 3 of them are now doing well, and therefore looking to that sounds counterintuitive, but 3 of them are doing well, and so raising more capital, which usually means that their valuation has gone up. And if we really wanted to, that would be an opportunity where our money is kind of already done a 5x. Let's pull it out, but typically it's case by case where we're going to follow that money and stay in the company if we believe in it. Okay.
The second question we always ask about business model is quite simply, why will you win? And what makes number one Cedars different from the rest? I think part of it is your background you mentioned, but what makes you guys unique in the space?
I think we're backing ourselves in a sense, is that our ability to not particularly help, but kind of just look someone in the eyes and kind of figure out whether that's an entrepreneur that's going to take this company or the next company somewhere really interesting and take an idea and turn it into a business, which is kind of, that early stage piece is a bit that whether I'm doing it myself or working alongside someone else doing it, I'm kind of addicted to that bit. I've been involved in companies that have grown beyond that. I've set up companies that have kind of grown beyond it, and kind of once it gets beyond 10 employees, I'm getting a bit bored because the buzz of the fear and the risk has kind of gone, and also you have to start putting in process and
it's execution time.
Paperwork.
It's like let's make this less chaotic, and that's when I start getting a bit bored. But I'm backing myself to help there and kind of see that in someone else.
How many hours are you spending on each project, do you think? Is it really hands-on? It
is really hands-on, and that's kind of been a bit of a problem, actually. We got to a stage where, so at about 7 or 8 deals, my full-time job was helping the portfolio.
Right.
And so there was a fine balance between bringing in new deal flow, because, and I'll explain, and helping the teams out. So I co-invest with my co-founder of 10 years. We met at OddsChecker as part of the founding team. He's a technical guy, and I'm on the commercial side, which is great because he can help out on that side of things, where I have no clue. And I'm going to help out with marketing, strategy, sales, fundraising, those kinds of things. And that's something that they're always going to be dealing with at those early stages. So it's been more hands-on than I actually thought it would be, but which is great because I love it. But in order to bring on another 10 deals, kind of I've set myself a target of being able to doing 15 or 20 deals, kind of spread that risk. Something had to change.
Do you ever get tired of hearing a pitch? I was just thinking when Raj was coming over here, I'm like, I was in the .com startup in '99 in New York, and I remember I was at a company called LuxuryFinder.com, and we had raised like 20 million to sell like jets online, and this is when nobody knew what e-commerce was, and we had no idea what we were doing. Like there was no retail experience in this company, and I remember pitching the deal. I was a CFO, pitching. I pitched my grandma when I would see her. I'd be like, okay, this is what we're trying to do. And I got to be so obsessed with this that it really started affecting my personality. And I was wondering if that happens to you, or if you get pitched by so many people that you go to the drink about and you're like, I just don't want to talk about business. Or if you got a way where you give people a minute and do that thing.
I'd see it's a recent change where I used to allocate an hour for a meeting, and I was like, this is nuts. I'd start, and I don't know about you, but in any field, if you allocate an hour, you end up filling that hour. Yeah. And so first meetings I've now got down to 20 minutes because I'm I lose interest after 20 minutes, realistically. And if you've got an interesting enough story, you can get it across in 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes to engage me to do a bit more research into the sector or about you guys, or speak to someone else that I know that knows that sector.
So will you tell people you get 20 minutes? Are you quite
I do
militant
now,
about it?
I'm very militant about it. And so I'm very open to taking meetings because I think that's good for me and good for the ecosystem, for early stage investors to be very accessible. So, like this afternoon, one of my meetings was a guy that literally tweeted me saying, what do I need to do to get a meeting with you? He was like, here's my email address, send me a calendar invite for a Friday any Friday coming up. And if I can make it, I'll hit yes. And if I can't, we can reschedule it. I told him it was going to be 20 minutes, and you know what? It was actually quite an interesting pitch.
Right.
So we're going to follow up. So it's like send me a bit more detail, and I'll run it past the rest of the team, and we'll see what to do. But yeah, there's a lot of people that are pitching things where there isn't a fit, or there isn't interest in the sector, or it's just been a long day.
What if you're having drinks and stuff? Do you just tell people not now, or do you say just email me?
Don't pitch me, bro.
So when I walked in here, I'd just come from a panel session where I was one of 3 or 4 investors in a room full of 100 people, kind of Q&A with some investors, and we're pretty much the only investors in the room. So for me to get out of that room was to go through everyone and out the other end, which is not easy when you're in a rush and everyone wants to talk to the few investors in the room.
Right.
And so the thing I tell everyone is just email me. I'm pretty good on email, and send me some details about what you're up to. If it's interesting, we'll hook up a meeting. If it's not, I'll give you feedback to say it isn't. Or, I realize there's a VC out of formerly in the Valley, now in LA, called Chris Sacca, and he just tweeted something about, unless someone comes up with an inbox solution that allows me to answer every email, there's going to be a lot of people think I'm a jackass, but I just can't get around to all of these emails, right? And it's the same with me. It's like, I immediately retweeted it because it's true. I'm not an asshole. It's just, sorry, mind the language, but it's not physically possible to get through all of this. And we talked about our model being lean. I could probably employ like 10 people to help me deal with this flow, but it's like, it just doesn't make sense to deploy that amount of capital, and so things get missed. But generally, I'm pretty good at listening to people and giving them that 20 minutes.
I'm gonna start doing that.
Yeah.
How much equity do you normally take in companies? I know, as a startup, often guys just hold their equity so close to their heart and never want to give it up. So just, you go to a Crowdcube or crowdfunding site, you get, they take this much equity, you pretty much set it, and then take a bit of cash. What's your model in terms of that?
It's almost set by the city and the bracket between C and Series A, how much activity there is, and that kind of relationship between those is what dictates almost standard terms at the early stage, because it could be by sector or business model. If you're working on a business that's going to be cash generative very soon, then that's going to skew your valuation. But if you're going to need to spend a good 2 years building up a database, and then you might figure out how to monetize it, you're going to be in the bracket with other companies that do that, regardless of whether you're in fintech or food tech, whatever you want to call it. And so, actually, I made a note before the panel session I was going to do. I was like, don't, make your terms almost standard, because it needs to be kind of formulaic for guys like us. It's like, look, your valuation is going to have to fit between, I'll label $500,000 and $1.5 million, and there's not going to be much maneuver, and the sweet spot's roughly $750,000 to $1 million pre-money. And so if they're raising a round of $250,000, $300,000, they're roughly giving away between 15 and 25% of the company, up to 30%. And then it's a case of how big that check is in that round.
Right. Yeah. But you don't sort of negotiate a little bit larger piece because you get so much more than just the cash?
So, that's an interesting point. This comes to what we're talking about. Right? This comes back to where the challenge between doing 10 deals and being hands-on and trying to get to 20. So there's what I call it, a phenomenon. There's a small movement amongst, in some of the major startup scenes, New York, California, of investors creating something called a startup studio. So the famous one out of New York is BetaWorks, been going for 5 years. And then in California, there's Idea Lab, which has been going for like, I think, 15 years.
Yeah, forever.
20 years, yeah.
Long time.
And then more recently in LA, something called Science Incubator, which is a similar model. And so what these guys have created is, rather than just having a fund of cash that they deploy, they have talent in-house. So by talent, I mean doers, right? So developers, designers, marketers, PR people, finance people. And, these teams vary in size. So I think BetaWorks is pretty big now. Science Incubator probably has a team of 20, 30 guys. Idea Lab's even bigger. Berlin has a bit of a scene right now where people are creating startup studios where they deploy capital, but they also create their own startups because they've got that in-house talent. So it's like, this is an interesting sector. Hell, we're a talented bunch of people here, and we've got the skill sets to do everything in-house. And so that's what we're at Number One Cedars, essentially in startup language, pivoting to create an environment where we do one of three things with any idea. So like we either externally invest, just as Number One Seed does right now. It's like, okay, that's a good team. They're in an interesting. So I call the three asses. It's a smart ass team with a kick ass product in a big ass market, right? So that's.
Okay.
I'm not going to get involved in that. So that's stolen from a VC in the Valley or New York called Jeff Clavier. But yeah, it's a three asses rule. It's like those are three key things you're looking for when you're going to invest in an external entity, right? So then you sometimes see a guy, let's say it's Colin, who's like, he doesn't have an idea, but that sounds wrong, but what I mean is he doesn't have an idea he's working on right now, but he's like a really smart entrepreneur, and we get on really well, and I'm like, I want to work with this guy, and he's going to come up with something really smart, but he doesn't have an idea right now. So it's like, well, I've got the resource, and I can help bootstrap, so why don't you come in-house, and we'll work on ideas together. Or there's another scenario where Colin has an idea, and his options are, I raise 200, 300, 400K in the open market, and build a team around me. Or another option is something that we're going to offer is we bootstrap the business and we say, look, here's 100K, but here's access to all my talent. And then if we prove something together, then great, go and raise external capital. And we can help you with that because we have all the connections. So Number One Seed is kind of pivoting into something called the Corner Shop, which will do all three of those, and pretty excited about that.
That's very interesting.
Really cool,
yeah. So just to get back to the equity percentage,
Sure.
you take between 20 and 30%
so
of companies?
So all the investors in that round will typically take 20 to 30%, and if the round is 300 and we've put in 100, we're going to take a third of the 30%. So so that I think our bracket is, we've got taken as little as 2 or 3% in companies, up to about 10% in companies.
Okay, so it's not just your own money. You have some other people that you invest money
with.
with.
So a typical seed round in London is about 300K. So even if we're investing at our maximum ticket size, it's only half the round.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you all have this one building over in Clerkenwell. Mm-hmm. It's like 4 stories tall. It's funny. I was just over at level 39 in Canary Wharf, and in a course of an hour, I met the guy that runs it, Eric. I met our guest that was here last week, Tommy, the Nigerian startup guy. He grabbed me, and I was like, whoa. And then I met a former employee of mine at ICAP named James Dawson, and some other guy that was working on retail tech, where he can track where people are in a retail space based on just where their mobile phone is. And you can see the footprint.
Present talk.
Yeah, maybe that was
that
was in an hour. And so I was just everybody in the space. It was really relaxed, and we all shook hands. I'm sure we'll email each other. But powerful. Yeah. Is this where you're pivoting to with Number One Seed, or is there power in having proximity of all these businesses next to each other?
The proximity thing's really interesting because the government's really pushed it, and a lot of the press have kind of poo-pooed the idea of plugging an area and trying to encourage activity in an area. And I was kind of on the fence about it initially, but and maybe because I was based in West London and I was and I live in West London, it's like everything in East London. This is
a 45-minute time. Every time I want to hang out with a Texas.
It's such a pain in the ass. But having finally made the move to East London, to Clerkenwell, I've really seen the value in the proximity of investors, startups, lawyers, accountants, whoever it is that kind of feeds the ecosystem. It's like if you bump into these guys and you have a beer with them, or when you're grabbing a coffee, you see them. I think that's part of it's it's momentum building, right?
Yeah.
And things happen quicker, and that kind of serendipity, and I think that's really helped London. That there is, something happening in East London.
Is it the vibe of the neighborhood that helps a bit, that it's kind of new, it's artistic, people take chances? I mean, you do get a feel sometimes when you're in the West End that it's very old school and BBC-ish and like everything's been there forever.
Yeah. The West End I definitely find more families, do you know what I mean? Whereas here it's more just younger sort of people doing startup stuff, and I think the startup community by nature is, I think, a younger sort of population, especially the tech scene, just because when you have, a West End mortgage and kids and stuff like that,
Nice.
which I don't have because I can't
not
afford
yet.
it. Yeah.
All right, we're gonna go a bit devil's advocate questions. I'm gonna do one. You're gonna ask him something,
Sure.
but 50 to 150 grand. Not a lot of money. Obviously, if you're covering the overheads, that makes a less of a difference. But man, I could burn through that pretty quick. Couple salaries, couple developers, some creative, and I'm wondering, how do you get by on such a small amount of money? And do you think you've missed a few fish in the net over the years because you didn't have that extra 3 months to get that deal closed, or that extra 20 grand, or that kind of thing?
Yeah, I actually recently wrote an article for Wired magazine complaining about just that. I think in London, startups don't raise enough money. I think it's a problem. So a seed round is probably averaging like 250, 300,000 pounds in London. But there's been this tax break called SEIS, which is, I don't want to get too tricky, but it's encouraged basically high net worth individuals to write off some of their tax by investing in startups. And they've capped the round size for startups raising capital from that source to 150k. So what it's done is drive in more capital at the earlier stages.
But smaller amounts.
Yeah. And so it's the average seed round in London, my guess, is coming down because of that tax break. So it's having the effect of making it harder for a good startup that should be able to raise 3, 4, 500,000. It's making it harder because investors are getting used to terms where they're investing 150 and they're getting more bang for their buck essentially in the startup, right? So I think it's a bit, I think it's a problem. Even in LA, where I spent all of December and January.
Tough life.
Primarily on a break, but what I did was like every day I was meeting 3 to 5 people in the startup world there. So VCs, angels, startups. There's a lot of accelerators cropping up there, incubation spaces, and I would say LA as a tech startup scene is behind London. Like no disrespect, but just a little bit behind London. However, a seed stage round in LA is $1 million, which is let's say the equivalent of £1 million in London based on cost of living or thereabouts.
Yeah.
So that got me thinking about why has that happened, and it's unfair if you're in London raising these smaller amounts.
Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but to get that second round, it almost like there needs to be an event to get it, right? It's a very psychological thing. Like, we're going for a second round. It's not like I just need another 150 on top of my 150. They always ask why. Like, is that not true?
It is true, yeah. So, I think this SEIS bracket should replace a friends and family round that we spoke about earlier, where people would raise a little bit of money before they have any proof of concept. And they need to convince their co-founder to quit their job. Say, look, we've got 50k in the bank. You can cover your bills at a really basic level, but it gives us a chance, like a small window, 3-6 months to just give this a go, right? And that's where you prove something out. But what the problem is, the jump from there to 300 is not a big jump, right? And so if the seed round was bigger, I think London would be better off for it, where good startups get more money to really prove something. Because talking about being lean and learning from the market, if you only have 150k, you might learn an awful lot in 11 months, and you burn through 150k, and then you go to your investor and say, I've cracked it, I know exactly what I need to do, but I need more money. They're not going to give it to you because you've not proven anything, but you're trying to convince them you've learned something, but you've got nothing to prove it. If you've got 300k in the bank, you get a chance to give it a go, fail, learn from that mistake, and give it another go. And I think it's a problem. I'm not. My point by investing up to 150 was about affordability for me, not this is how much you need to survive. in answer to your question, yeah, I think I wish startups could raise more money, and it would raise the bar of the quality of the startups that do so.
I've heard so much from startups, like just guys, founders, just how much time they waste raising cash, right? So from that perspective, you go and raise $500,000 instead of 300. Well, now you've got yourself maybe a year and a half, or whatever your business is, to really go at it, as opposed to go 6 months and then spend 3 months raising.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? You're not working on the business, because fundraising can be a full-time sort of
really
job
is, yeah.
for a founder, which is not always the best resource to spend your time.
But you're capping your investments at 150.
Yeah.
But you're different because you're providing an environment and overheads and that kind of thing.
So no, we're different because we appreciate that the round shouldn't be just 150. We appreciate we're going to share that deal, right? So if someone comes to us and we think they've really got something interesting there, and they say we're raising just 150, I'd probably encourage them to raise double that and let me help you introduce you to other angels or early stage investors, seed funds, so that you've got a longer runway.
Okay, cool. All right, moving on to our Silicon Reel checklist. If you had to sign a non-compete right now for your industry, which I guess is seeding in any other company that you're currently involved with, and then someone gave you 20 million pounds, what would you do with it? As in, what new area would you pursue that you find kind of interesting right now?
So if I had $20 million or pounds in this space, I would double down on this startup studio concept. I think having in-house talent and looking for external talent is really interesting right now. There's a little bit of a nod in the valley towards the terms called the operational VC, where those old school big VC firms that manage big sums of money have a bit of a team in-house to kind of help steer their companies. And I think that it's something we're going to see far more over the next 5-10 years, and that's what I would do.
And what if you couldn't? What if you couldn't be in your industry? You had to do something completely
different.
completely
different. Well,
you'd be devastated. I can see it.
If it wasn't in the tech space, it would be something commercial, right? The thought of getting off my ass and my hard work actually bringing the buck in is much more interesting to me than doing that for someone else. And so it would be entrepreneurial, but maybe not using technology, maybe not as scalable, but I don't know, maybe a fish and chip shop down the road or something. But
food tech is big. Or food startups are big, right?
Yeah.
Is there something in the past where you could see that you've, mistakes that you've made when you were kind of being this seeder type things, where you didn't give these guys enough of your time, or you're like, I really should have set those guys up with better overhead or less interference? Or is there something you saw in the past where you really fixed about the way you do business?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like one of the early angels in the tech space, but to me it still feels like I've only just started doing it. So I'm still digesting kind of what I've done well and what I've done badly. I think the time in LA when I was away was really interesting because it allowed me to look at what I'd done and look at, it's obvious when you look at something far too closely, you can't get any insight into what's happening there. You need to kind of step away. And the time in LA was really interesting because it's more on a personal note, because it was like, okay, this investing thing's awesome, love it, but actually I want to build something as well. So how do I figure that out? But I haven't really taken the time to look at our process, as in how we're helping companies. I think maybe subconsciously we've realized that we could be helping more tangibly, i.e., rather than just talking to them about something, we could be doing it for them, right? Which is why we're setting up the studio. It's another thing about fundraising is finding talent for your startup. It's difficult. You pay lower than anyone else. If you want really good people, you need to be really persuasive. So my thoughts there is, if you can access really good talent via your investor, that's really interesting. That's one, and the other one I think is we have, I was alluded to it earlier, where fundraisers were getting lower and lower and lower. And as an investor, you can kind of fall into the trap where you think, right, I'm going to get more money if it's a smaller round and the valuation is lower. And that's definitely something that we've stopped. It's like we've actively encouraged good startups to raise more money. Whereas previously I was falling into the trap of the market saying, you're going to struggle to raise 300. You're going to struggle to raise 400. My advice is raise a little bit more because it's achievable. But now I'm, spreading the gospel that good investors should be encouraging bigger rounds for good teams. So I think those are two interesting things that over the year and a half, 2 years of investing that we've done wrong.
How about as like a mentor? What's the biggest mistake you see in sort of the founders of the companies you invest in?
I think the biggest mistake a mentor can make is, because you sometimes have these young guys, young impressionable guys, is the biggest mistake you can make is that you know all the answers, because you don't, right? I might be good at sales and partnership marketing and help with fundraising, but who says I'm the best guy to figure out what your business model is or what your pricing strategy should be? And I think there's there's not enough experience in London of people building and scaling large technology companies. The quality of the mentoring is not fantastic. And I think the one way to improve that, until there's more knowledge in the ecosystem, is for people to be more honest about what they're genuinely allowed to have an opinion on, and where they should say, you know what, here's an opinion, but I'm no expert. Yeah. And I think we've been really honest about that from the start. About, look, we are going to help you, but it's much more as a sounding board, not as the expert. As someone that's always had kind of I've never really had a mentor, but there's always been someone within the company that's kind of been more mature, been around this more than we have. And I've always just really appreciated bouncing ideas off them. And especially if you're a solo founder, not having a co-founder to bounce ideas off is really tough. And we kind of try and play that role for solo founders.
The tendency in the U.S. is to overwork, maybe in Canada as well. It's like, you're in Silicon Valley, you're working 120 hours a week. I want you on your BlackBerry 24/7. And it's even been argued that the productivity goes way down in the States when that happens. I've found that it seems to be a little more relaxed when it comes to London and the startups, as in you don't expect people to be there at 10 at night, burning the midnight oil. Or do you? I was wondering, which kind of guy are you? Do you go sometimes out to the Cedars floor and no one's there on a Sunday and you're like, what the fuck are you doing? Money's burning, fixed costs are ticking away.
Yeah. I think the startups in London have following the trend of how people work in London. It's from all accounts, New York is nuts. Like, people work really long hours, and it's unusual for someone to walk out of the office at 6:00 in New York. Whereas in London, it's pretty normal for everyone to leave the office at 6 and go and have a drink and then go home. And I've been a big advocate of working smart and breaking up your day. But then, I'm like Jekyll and Hyde on that one myself. It's like, sometimes I'm like, I need to work longer, harder hours. And then sometimes I'm like, let's break this day up and be a bit smarter about this. So I'm not shouting at people for not being there longer hours. It's, at the end of the day, it's what you do, not how long you work at it, right? And so we're looking at what's achieved rather than the effort taken to achieve it.
It's a fine line, though, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But we're not that closely involved where we're checking out what time people turn up. Yeah, we don't know what time people turn up, what time they don't. However, kind of more on a macro level, if things aren't getting done, then let's have a chat about the problem you're having in that area.
Yeah. Are your offices in the same building?
As some of the startups?
As number one seed, like that 4-story. Are you there?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So
you are watching.
So we are.
How many of your companies are
in the building? Yeah. So 11, but that's because I'm an LP in the Techstars Accelerator.
Okay.
But I hold like 0.0002% in all of the companies that go through that program. So it's not like I'm remotely important to any of these startups. Right. Any of the startups that I've invested more money in, none of them are in the building currently. A couple of them are thinking about moving in. So that would be interesting.
Yeah, it would be. I'm going to just move us along here and ask you another typical Silicon Real question. If you could make a phone call right now to the 20-year-old Raj and give him some advice, and it can't be just keep going, Raj, you're doing great. It has to be some real advice. What would you tell him?
That is a really tough question. I think
You got an 11-month-old child at home?
Yeah.
You're going to have to start giving advice pretty soon.
Yeah. Yeah, so the advice to myself is don't lean on that table, you might bang your head. 20-year-old Raj. 20-year-old Raj was kind of, he was not particularly mature. He would see something shiny and chase it. He didn't realize, he didn't have any understanding of when he would work hard and when he would work hard, like what was motivating him. And so it would almost be a case of just think about what you enjoy and what you're good at and focus on that. I think I was kind of almost aimless. Like, I would just stumble across something I was good at and do it. Whereas maybe that little bit of advice would be concentrate on what you enjoy and what you're good at. I think that would be really good advice to 20-year-old Raj. And I think that kind of started happening for me when I was, more mid-20s, where I just realized that, okay, just concentrate on what you're good at, rather than trying to be something that you're not. I think
it's hard to for 20. You don't always know what you're good at, right?
Yeah.
So until you stumble and fall and
Sure.
be like, wow, I sucked at that, right?
Yeah.
Which is also.
Yeah. So for me, it was like kind of always been like average to good at a lot of things, but I had an inkling of what I enjoyed was really important, and I felt like, okay, I can write pretty well, so maybe I should look at journalism or something. But I hated the process of writing, but I could write pretty well. So I probably wasted time. Yeah, do what you enjoy and what you're good at. I think that's smart advice for
and on that same note, like there's you must deal with a lot of young guys in your startups. And for that 20-year-old that's listening right now, I mean, what advice do you give them if they, for example, one day want to get an investment from number one seed or want to be in the Silicon Roundabout community? Like, what do you tell them if they have one thing to work on or focus on?
You get there's a lot of guys that are just guys and girls that just think that's a really sexy scene, I want to be a part of it. Yeah. And so they're literally sitting there, tapping on the table, trying to come up with an idea to be part of the scene. And I think that's a wrong way to look at things, right? It should be back to the advice is like, what are you good at? What are you passionate about? And then if that's a tech startup, awesome. So yeah, that would be the advice. Is like, don't just look at a lifestyle that you kind of that appeals. Go back to what you're good at and what your passions are, and I think that's going to lead to a much more fulfilling life rather than just kind of trying to live someone else's dream.
Yeah, it's tempting, it does look sexy from the outside. So, well, look at us. We did
everyone
a
here
show.
These massive exits, right? I think that's attractive too from like a 20-year-old.
And the thing I joke about too is like come to the drink about and you'll find people that are very unique. Yeah. They actually enjoy their jobs, or at least they're excited about their jobs. And there's something infectious about that too. Last piece on the advice tip is just best advice you've ever been given.
Related to startup world, one of the things that resonated with me was advice from a former investor and now a co-investor, a guy called Luke Johnson, famous for investing in restaurants in the food space. He floated Pizza Express. We all know Pizza Express.
Yeah, big one.
One of the things he always said was what makes a good partnership, as in the skill sets of a couple of people that come together to build a business. And that's something that has really resonated with me, is because to this day, and I mentioned it earlier, it's like guys that do this on their own, I don't know how they do it, because you can get carried away with yourself and you need a sense check sometimes. And certainly for me, who's like very optimistic and wants to move very fast, I sometimes need someone that's very negative and says, hold on, slow down here. Let's think about this before we go and do that. So Luke, it's a bit more old school, and he was like, what makes a good partnership is an accountant and a salesman. And in the tech world, it's kind of been a technical guy and a commercial guy, which is a kind of the relationship, which is in some sense is someone that's methodical, logical, versus someone who can sell and just wants to go at 100 miles per hour. Actually, one of the worst pitches, someone pitched to me, and it's one of the worst pitches ever. But something he said was like one of the smartest things ever. It was like, so I was saying, what is do you have a co-founder? You need a co-founder. It's like, yeah, I have this kind of advisor guy who's, he's kind of like the accelerator to my brake. I was like, that's a really good piece of advice. It came back to this, what makes a good partnership. And so when it's applied to my own life, my own working life, where I've got this accelerator brake relationship with my business partner, and it's also informed how I invest, because when I'm assessing the quality of a team, I'm looking at, okay, who's going to be the accelerator here because you need one, who's going to be the brake here because you're going to need one, who's going to look at the detail today, and who's going to be looking at where we're going to be in 6 months time, in 12 months time. that was whether it's the best piece of advice, it's certainly one that resonated and informs what I do quite a lot.
What did I miss? What did I miss, Colin?
If you could only choose one personality trait, the top personality trait of a founder that you want to invest in, what would it be?
Drive. Yeah, it's funny. We were having a conversation the other day on this on the penthouse, the investor floor in the office, and someone swung by the office who wasn't an investor, and there was like a gaggle of 4 investors just having a chat with this guy. We're talking about good traits for entrepreneurs, and one of them that, I don't know, it's been documented. It's not something else. I'm not saying anything new here, but good entrepreneurs often have a chip on their shoulder. They're out to, perhaps it's paranoia, but they're out to prove something to the world. Whether that's the same as drive, but yeah, that kind of something where you feel like, whether it's you feel like everyone's looking down on you, or you feel like you've got to prove something to certain people, I think, and which creates a form of drive. I think that's something I'm looking for in a good entrepreneur.
Good answer. I'm going to take a question you told me about earlier, probably our last question we can do, but one of your companies you invested in is Cedars, am I right? And you know this space really well.
Yeah.
Actually, I'll let you answer the question. You ask the question because it's yours.
No, I was just sort of talking about you invested in Cedars, and in a way it's almost like innovator's dilemma, right? Because they are in your space, and they are...
Can you explain Cedars' business model real quick?
Yeah, so Cedars is just crowdfunding website, sort of put your business plan online and video, and then you let the crowd sort of invest.
And they get equity, unlike in a lot of the
That's
Kickstarters,
right, yeah.
which is unique to the UK if people aren't. I think it is right now.
It's relatively unique globally,
Yeah,
right? I think
pretty much.
the UK is one of the first sort
To
of...
open it up to the extent where any member of the public can invest from as little as £10, that's pretty unique. In the US, you just have the Jobs Act, part of the Jobs Act go through, which allows people to promote their startup or someone else's startup, but only accredited investors can put money in, not
just anyone.
Yeah, so you have to be...
Although technically on Cedars, you have to kind of click a button.
That's right, yeah. To say you're a high net worth or have a certain level of income. That's true,
Right.
yeah.
So this company you've invested in is effectively going to try to get other people to invest in them.
And the goal, I guess, Crowdcube, Cedars, there's a few of them now, but they're trying to raise for companies in the space that you are. So I thought it was interesting that you invested in one of your...
Or what's the difference between the two? Yeah.
So the difference is, and no disrespect to... So the difference is, where I talked about a lawyer or a dentist that wants to invest in startups, Cedars and Crowdcube are... Okay. No, not Crowdcube. Cedars is the way for them to get involved, because it gives them a good cross spectrum of what's in the market. It means that they can do it at a distance, but get exposure to a lot of different types of companies. And I see Cedars certainly at the level where they're currently able to help fundraising. Things may change in the future where as an asset class it becomes bigger and they are able to raise larger sums of money. But currently investments on Cedars are limited to 150K. It's no coincidence that's at the same level as the tax break. And so I think, and this is something that I wrote in that same Wired article that was quite controversial, the CEO of Cedars came back at me saying, hold on, I don't agree that we're lowering the bar. But what I came back with was that Cedars replaces that friends and family round. Not everyone has wealthy friends and family they can reach out to help them get out of their job or build something or get some premises or whatever it is your business needs. And I think certainly Cedars and any crowdfunding platform will get someone that thinks, that's an interesting idea. I'll risk some capital. It's risky capital. We all know that. No one's pretending otherwise. And I think that's where Cedars will come in. It's like, we need 20K, we need 50K, or we need 150K. But I'm always going to be investing in bigger rounds or being a part of a bigger round.
And later rounds as well.
And slightly later rounds.
Okay, but you are an investor in Cedars.
Yes.
So you want them to be successful.
Hell yeah.
Okay. Hell yeah. Guys, that's pretty much our time. How do people get a hold of you? How can they get that email so they can get? You're going to have so many meetings after
this. Twitter's great to get a hold of me.
Okay.
I have 3 accounts. So my personal one is at Raj Ram76. And then number 1 seed, which has most of our following, is going to start sending traffic to our studio, which is at Corner Shop News.
Right.
So yeah, start following
Corner
us.
Shop News.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were. Yeah. We were looking at the Corner Shop IO.
Yeah, so
website
that's
earlier.
the studio brand.
Right,
Number
right.
One Seed will eventually.
Is it on a corner?
When we get offices for it, they'll have to be, right?
It'll have to be, exactly.
There's a bar in Shoreditch called Corner Shop, so we're thinking of having our launch party. There was also a band called the Corner Shop.
Yeah, I love those
So
guys.
we're gonna
Launch
try
party.
and do our launch party for the Corner Shop at the Corner Shop with the Corner Shop.
Brimful of Asha, right?
Exactly, yeah.
That's a great song. I was like, I realized you're not cool in the Silicon space unless you have like 3 or 4 Twitter handles on your Twitter description. Courtney Boyd Myers has like 6.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm doing this, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing I just feel like I'm lazy.
I'm left out, I think, yeah.
You're doing a few things.
A few things, but I don't put them in my thing. But I should.
Yeah,
Maybe
you should.
I'm leaving them out.
Yeah, okay. Colin, any news for Silicon Reel? People want to get a hold of us. It's just at Silicon Reel, right?
Yeah, tweet at us is the best way to get a hold of us right now. And again, feedback. This is for you guys, so let us know what you want.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is literally dedicated to the people of the technology startup scene. All we're doing is reflecting what's going on out there.
Yeah.
And I just know everyone likes hearing these stories because it might have taken you 2 weeks to get this meeting with Raj, and now you can get a bit of a feeling for what it's like. So, and we want to have all sorts of different types of people here: failures, successes, people in government, VCs, every part of the equation. So, so there you go. Thanks, guys, for being here.
Loved it.
Yeah,
thanks very
thanks for
much. I'm
coming.
going to
Awesome.
recommend many more people to come this way and
Good.
view it and maybe be part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful.
Okay, cool. Until then, it's about the people. All right, guys. Peace.
Living in Nigeria is living on the edge, okay? And every once in a while, you sort of need to sort of take the time out. Even when I was living in London, I did the same thing. I just pick up a boat in Southampton and sail off. So you need that downtime, and I'll use London for that. Plus the fact that my wife and kids are here.